one person who we serve in our living related services, and she was talking about how she was going to be moving out, and she wouldn't be getting services from us anymore. And I said, "Oh, can you tell me a little bit about that?" Well, I've met the man of my dreams and in the day program that she went to. And I said, okay, so how does that have to do with that you have to leave the house or that you don't want services from us? She goes, well, I want to live with him and we can't do that here. And I said, who told you you can't do that here?
Oh,
So flash forward a year later, we were renovating a house. Her and her boyfriend moved in together.
Wow.
that's
They
great.
wanted another roommate because she's like, I don't want to spend all my time with him.
Welcome to another episode of The Diligent Leader. I'm Alex Ficari, one of your hosts.
And I'm Kaylee Jakovics. Thanks for joining us today.
You know, when you think about leadership, right, and the diligent leader and what we're bringing, the content we're bringing to you, you know, you're always faced with, you know, what do you do? What do you do? What's the next best step? And I think, you know, there's a lot of empowering that has to happen. And there's a lot of awareness that has to happen. And I think that we all lead paths as leaders that we don't necessarily know the outcome, but we know the direction we want to start. And I'm really excited to bring to you today our particular guests. And, you know, he's a great, not only is he a great leader, but he is empowering lives. Not only other leaders within his organization, but the lives that they help along their path is really inspiring. So thanks for watching. We hope you enjoy today's episode. Kaylee, who do we have lined up?
Yeah, we have Jonathon Rondeau, the president and CEO of the Arc Central Chesapeake Region. And today's episode is Empowering Lives, a conversation with the Arc's CEO. So, Jonathon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Well, I want to get started. First, tell us a little bit about, you know, more on the personal side. We want to get to know you. Well, we want the audience to get to know you. We already know you, but tell us a little bit about, you know, where you're located, what do you like to do for fun, who you are.
Sure. So the Arc Central Chesapeake Region serves Anne Arundel County and Maryland's Eastern Shore. So I'm in our Linthicum office. We have 3 locations in Anne Arundel County, and we are building a new location, an additional location in Easton, but we've been in Easton, Maryland for the past 20 years. I live in Catonsville with my husband, and I have a 7-year-old son. It's his last day of school today. Although I feel like this
So
whole week has
fun.
been the last day of school because I don't know that they've actually done any work.
Yeah, like
But
parties, ice
he,
cream, whatever.
yeah, he's very excited about the summer. Although I'm not sure he knows what he's excited about, but he's excited that school's done. That sort of thing. But I'm not originally from Maryland, so I moved here after college. It seems like a lot of people move to the Mid-Atlantic region after college, and a lot of people
Same.
think they're going to be here for a year or two. And over 20 years, I've been here. And so what brought me here was a job working at a camp for kids and adults with disabilities, a sort of year-round position. But that's how I started doing this work. I started when I was 15, looking for a summer job. I always gone to camp as a kid, and found a camp that was hiring 15-year-olds as junior counselors to work with people with or kids and adults with disabilities. And I was like, well, it's one summer. I love camp. How bad can it be? I'll do it. And it was a transformational experience. I worked with my first 2 weeks, 2 older gentlemen, that one of which had lived in an institution most of his life, another gentleman that had never been away from his mom. He was in his 40s for more than a day.
Wow.
And so as a 15-year-old junior counselor, I got to experience sort of what independence and choice looked like for these 2 gentlemen, and the fact that they were more than double my age and were experiencing that for the first time. And it was less about the activities, whether that was horseback riding, swimming, that sort of. It was more about that idea of choice. And so I talk about it now a lot and talk about how transformational it was in my own personal and professional journey. But at that time, I just thought it was like, oh, I need to do this, right? Like more people need to have that piece. I don't know that I knew that how transformational it was, or how much of a basic right they were not given in their life. that came in college and beyond, that discovery. But that's sort of what's led me to this work. And what, no matter what role I've had, it's been, how do we create opportunities for people? How do we push the barrier? How do we challenge the status quo? In a thoughtful way, right? Like there's
Sure.
people who just like to rabble rouse and sort of blow everything up and walk away. I think it's more about how do we incrementally make change to actually and rebuild and build the future we want, right? Like it's not just about the sort of blowing up part, which
Yeah.
although many times it is important, the rebuilding is the harder part, and often the most impactful,
Yeah.
um, uh, sort of around that. Uh, uh, so yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Like, you know what I think's it's, really reaffirming to hear is that, somebody at your age, then was literally moved in such a way that you're like, wow, this is really moving me. This is where I'm going to set my path and direction. And, it was kind of unbeknownst to you that would be your path forever. But I mean,
Yeah,
I think it's fantastic that, you're passionate about something. I think any leader, that's out there in any organization, for profit or non for profit, not for profit. I think it's fantastic that you find something that you're passionate about, because then you can lead with purpose. So
well,
that's great.
I have friends, and even my husband is like, it was like, I just have to get through this job and we'll move on to one that I'm really passionate about. And I'm like, I've never had a job. Oh, I guess that's not true. I worked in retail for about 9 months my senior year of high school, and I
Oh,
didn't
no.
particularly like it. But most of my real jobs, like I've never not been excited to get up and go to work. And it doesn't mean I don't have bad days. There's not days that I
Yeah.
don't question sort of like,
Of
am I the
course.
most effective leader? But
Yeah.
everyone has those moments, right? But there's not a day that I'm not excited about the work or excited about the people that I work with or work for or work on the behalf of. And I think that is really important. And I think in this day and age where people are searching for the things that make their work-life balance work more than they are looking for what
Yeah.
just feeds your soul, right? Like,
Yeah.
and oftentimes what feeds your soul isn't going to be a remote job. It's not necessarily going to be the one that has the best hours. It's not always going to be the one that pays the most, right? And often in most cases, it's all the opposite of all those things. And so I, I, I think it's just those are important sort of lessons, I think, in self-discovery as you sort of go through
But
that process.
I think that's a great transition to kind of one of the first questions that I think people need to know about the organization. But how have you, well, not how have you, but as you look at your mission, right, and people looking for purpose in their careers, I think it's always an underlying. I agree with you. That's always an underlying thing that's there.
Yep.
But how does that translate to your mission at the Arc, and what is that mission? Could you maybe talk a little bit about that so people
Yeah.
are more familiar?
So the Arc Central Chesapeake region has been around since 1961, around empowering people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to live, work, and connect with their communities. At our core, we're about making sure that people with disabilities have access to live the life they envision. So what I just talked about for my own life and career trajectory, that's what we do every day. We support about 3,600 people. The majority, we have one program that's statewide, but the majority in Anne Arundel County and Maryland's Eastern Shore. And we have fantastic direct support professionals who are working one-on-one or in small groups with the people we serve to help them navigate what that is, whether
Sure.
that is helping them live independently in their own home, whether that's helping them get the job for the first time, getting their second or third job because you're moving up that ladder, whether it's just discovering new hobbies or life interests, and sort of everything in between. And so I think it is a direct correlation. We're a lot of ways in the self-discovery business for
Yeah.
people. But it's really about the people we serve's
Yeah.
discovery and what they want, and how they want to look at that. Now, we realize everyone lives and has family, and everyone has friends, and everyone has community, and those all influence that. But particularly historically, people with intellectual and developmental disabilities don't always in the driver's seat of their own lives.
Yeah.
And so we work really hard to sort of help them balance and navigate that, but also say, like, you have a voice, and what is that voice, and how do you want to do that?
Yeah. And I definitely see how that, you know, the idea, the concept, because I can only relate through your anecdotal story that's been a, you know, wonderful thing. And I can imagine how it just enlightening that moment must be when you see somebody achieve that goal, right? And how thrilled they must be in their own spirit to say, wow, I'm in control of my life. And now they are, and they have a little bit more, you know, more autonomy, which I think is what we all deserve and have that right to. So I mean,
Yeah.
it's inspirational. I definitely say, you know, the Arc and what you guys are doing. So that's great. Definitely.
No, there's an example that sort of underscores and highlights that is so I've been here at the Arc for almost 7 years as the CEO, and my first year I was getting to know the people we serve and was meeting with one person who we serve in our living related services, and she was talking about how she was going to be moving out, and she wouldn't be getting services from us anymore, and I said, "Oh, can you tell me a little bit about that?" Well, I've met the man of my dreams and in the day program that she went to. And I said, okay, so how does that have to do with that you have to leave the house or that you don't want services from us? She goes, well, I want to live with him and we can't do that here. And I said, who told you you can't do that here?
Oh,
So fast forward a year later, we were renovating a house. Her and her boyfriend moved in together.
Wow.
that's
They
great.
wanted another roommate because she's like, I don't want to spend all my time with him, which is probably some truth to a happy relationship right there. But that piece, and they are an example of we support three couples that have they've met. We may have served them
That's
in
nice.
different
Wow.
capacities, and we've helped navigate so that they can live under the same roof on the whatever terms that they want for themselves,
Yeah.
just like we all do with our significant others, and determine what those rules are for ourselves and how that looks. And so I think that's just an underscore because that's a very basic thing, right? Like
Yeah.
living with the people you want, but also the person you want to spend the rest of your life with, we often take for granted, right? Like, but it's such a
Absolutely.
big milestone. And unfortunately, for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, the number one challenge is about them having meaningful relationships. They're not always romantic relationships, but just
Sure.
how do you have friends, right?
Yep.
How do we have real, authentic connection? Which has been an issue for or is now an issue for a lot of people for a whole host of reasons, whether it's the
Yeah.
pandemic, technology, that sort of thing. But I think particularly for a particular population that has been marginalized or not always fully included, that has been particularly more challenging.
Yeah, it can certainly be intimidating and, you know, various aspects, but the fact that you're able to do that and get them living together and help support, you know, the community in many, many different ways, it's inspiring. And I know you've done a lot for the ARC, so we're excited to hear more about,
Yeah.
you know, your leadership. And I guess tell me a little bit about kind of the values, the leadership values that you have and kind of leading this organization. I know
Yeah.
you've done such an amazing amount of work in a short amount of time.
Yeah. I think, you know, and correct me if we're wrong while you do that. Tell us about that, but you've essentially increased it threefold, right? Where you came in 7 years ago, and now the organization has grown. I think whether you're running a nonprofit or a for-profit, the challenges are the same. You know,
Yeah.
that preconceived notion has to be kind of wiped out. Leadership is leadership. So I'm
Yeah.
really curious, like, and craving to hear how did you do it? You know.
So I think there's a lot of misnomers that nonprofits are different than for-profit companies. The only difference is
Exactly.
our tax status, right? At the end of the day, the money that we make gets reinvested back in the communities and our services. But we have to function in the exact same way that every business does around that. And so that's the lens that I come into this work with,
Beautiful.
first and foremost. But at the end of the day, we're balancing mission and margin every day, right? And so we're not always having to look at, I don't have investors or others. I have the community, I have a board that I'm responsible to, but we just use a little bit different metrics to
Yeah.
determine that. But as I came into the organization, I think there was real opportunities in the communities we serve who needed more services and wanted more. And so we embarked on a bold, organic, strategic goal to sort of meet the communities where they are and provide those, and not to provide those to take over market share, or that we don't want other providers for people with disabilities to exist, because we believe that people need to have choice, that we should not be the only game in town.
Yeah.
We will not make every person we serve and their family happy. It's just not possible. No organization, no business can do that. But there shouldn't be people who go without services
Yeah.
because the community doesn't have a provider, or the providers there don't have capacity. So that's really what it is. In the pandemic, about 4 months into the pandemic, our leadership team realized that this isn't going away anytime soon.
Mm.
And so this idea that we are not going to take new people into services needs to stop. And so at month 6, so in about November of 2020, we resumed admissions into our services. And in that first year, we took 39 people into various of our core services. A gentleman whose mom died during the pandemic and was almost homeless. People who lived with their families and still could, but realized being home together was not a healthy relationship for everyone. And so coming out of the pandemic, they may not have had a relationship anymore, right? And so they needed a new environment to live in. I think a lot of people, whether you had a disability or not, discovered that, right? And so, but you someone without a disability who doesn't need that support can go and just find an apartment or move in
Right.
with a new roommate. That wasn't the case. We had 50 people who were in essential jobs who had to continue working, but our job coaches couldn't be present at those locations with them. And so finding new ways, whether it's talking in an earpiece to them, which actually is a much more normalizing way to provide those supports, right? Because everyone walks,
Wow.
go anywhere nowadays, you see everyone walking around with an earpiece. Right. And so those are just some examples. And so it just continued thereafter. So while everyone else sort of paused, and then in 2021, 2022, as people were still starting to sort of figure out how they were going to reopen, we were just really resuming back to full operations, because we were just sort of continuing on those pieces. And so that really over the last 4 years has really been that growth. It was like, it's just sort of, there was a lack of those services around that. But my approach, I think, back to Kaylee's question of like my approach to leadership, I believe everyone leads from the seat that they're in. So whether that's our direct support professionals, our receptionist at any one of our locations, our program managers or executive leaders, everyone has an important role. Most of our direct support professionals work independently in the community with the people they're serving. They don't have a manager right there to tell them what to do or how to do
Sure.
that. We need to provide them the tools and resources, and then trust and empower them to be able to do that, and then treat them like the leader they are, right? Being a leader doesn't mean that you don't get support. Being a leader doesn't mean that you don't uh, uh, need resources. It we all just lead in different ways. And so I think that being first and foremost, I think is fundamental. I think secondly is, how do we make sure everyone has a voice and feels like they belong? And so over the last several years, whether it's through our employee satisfaction survey or our diversity climate survey, our employees say that 83% either agree or strongly agree that they can bring their whole self to work. 85% feel a strong sense of belonging to the organization. When you add neutral, people who are neutral to those feelings, those are well into the 90s. That's that's what makes us be able to do what it is. I mean, I can quote unquote lead from my seat, but unless everyone else has the ability to show up and be able to lead themselves, we can't achieve those things.
So I do have a question about that. So if you think you have to set that belief that you have, right, has to be the cultural norm, right? They need to hear it from leadership. They need to know it. So how do you, as a new leader coming in 7 years ago, have your voice be heard, and then have everybody believe in that voice? Like, did you have a particular strategy, or was it just repetitiveness? Like, how did you go about making sure people shared that same thought process?
So I think at first, so I think there's a couple of things. I think there's a lot, you can't over communicate. And so I spent a lot of time doing town halls, sending emails, going out, talking to the people our employees. So I think that's first, but I think I use the same line, leadership at every level. I've used that same line for 7 years, right? Like, even though sometimes I'm like, hey, can I say that in a different way? No, I'm not going to say it in a different way, because then people won't know what I'm talking about, right? And so I think it's constantly reinforcing it. It is also holding our managers accountable that they are doing what that vision is. Are they empowering them? Are they providing the supports in the way that I'm and our other executive leaders are expecting them to? And if they're not, how are we coaching and supporting them to meet that, meet that expectation? And we're always growing. We can always improve, right? There's always that piece. I think the other is my first 4 years, we were heavily focused on changing the experience for our direct support professionals, whether that was almost doubling their salary over the last 7 years. So going from $9.88 an hour, which is our starting salary for direct support professionals, to it'll be $20 an hour by July. To how do we make sure that they have the resources? So if you're someone who's getting people that we support in the community, why are we expecting you to use your car and we're paying you mileage? We'll make sure that there's a quality agency vehicle that you can use and that it's easily and accessible. Around that, giving you the technology you need, whether it's a cell phone or iPad, to be able to do those sort of things. And so, but setting that expectation, and it didn't start with leadership getting those things. It started with our direct support professionals getting those resources. And then, because at the end of the day, none of us can do our job if the people we serve aren't getting their services, and that's happening through our DSPs.
Yeah, so it sounds like what I'm hearing you say is, that you set a new set of standards, right? You elevated things up, and you said, okay, this is, as an organization, this is what we should be doing. And then to create that, consistency, you made sure all players, really, to really say what you're saying, all players understood that message, and you just embraced the redundancy, because I think, and I appreciate, because I do that as well. Like with my organization, I feel like I'm saying things a million times as well. Like, can I say it a different way? Because I know they're tired of hearing it. But I think I love the fact that you said there's a fundamental truth there, that this is our mission. This is how we need to approach it. And I'm not changing that. Like that has to be it. So, I applaud that. I mean, I hope I'm receiving everything you're saying, right? But that's how I'm taking it.
I think everything you said is accurate. I think the other piece I would add is also, even this week, you're talking to two different employee groups, not taking it for granted that there's a wide mix there's people who've been here for a few days to people who've been here years, right? And so when you're talking about giving an update on something, taking the few minutes to remind everyone where we were, right? Because even the people who've been here a long time forget where we were, right? Around that. So I think that plays a piece, but also talking about the why. When we roll out a new policy or practice or initiative, it's like, why are we doing this? Is this a pet project?
Yeah.
Sometimes it might be. But most of the time, there's a real reason why. And talking to people about how this builds, or how will that do, or what's the sort of minimum expectation. We rolled out a new policy, and I said, for the first year, we're just going through the motions is success, right? Like, year 2 will be us now sort of going deeper. But a lot of times when you talk about change or changing expectations, right, I think where leaders and organizations often fail is that you want perfection in such a short period of time that, one, you're never going to get perfection.
I don't know what you're talking about. I've never felt that in my whole life.
But 2, like, I think about it is like, it's like working out, right? It's a muscle you build, right? Like, and so it's going to hurt for the first couple weeks, but then it's going to get a little easier. And then all of a sudden it's sort of like, I'm not even lifting this weight anymore. And then it's like, oh, now I can add weight, right? Like, but that analogy is true for change, right? Like it is
Yeah.
really hard at the beginning, and then it's not so bad. Then it's super easy, and now I can take on another change, right? Like or another evolution of that piece
Right.
um,
And
uh,
how are
around that.
you?
And so I think
Go ahead.
it's important as a leader to understand that like oftentimes I'm like 6 months or a year ahead because anything we rolled out, we started talking about 3 or 6 months ago. So like I'm so done with it, but I have to remember that no one else is, right?
Hey,
Like,
but you're
and
ahead of it,
um,
which is
yeah,
great.
we're sort of in different places. And my job, using that analogy of working out, is the coach, right? And so just because I can do it doesn't mean someone else can do it, right? And my job is really to actually someone else in our organization is probably going to do it better, right? Like a good coach, that's what you do. Like you're coaching someone else to sort of do that,
Yeah,
use their skills and talents in a different way
that
and
makes
do
sense.
it
It makes
way.
total sense. And I know, like rolling new things out, whether it's with your employee, with the community, with self-directed. I guess how are you measuring success or the impact on the community as well?
So I think first and foremost, we measure things the way any business does is are people staying? It's like you
Yeah,
vote with people vote with their feet, right? Like are our employees
Wow.
staying?
I like that.
Do
I
the
like
people we
that a lot.
serve
That's a
want
good
to
one.
stay, right? Like you can have all these fancy metrics, but it's been the same thing for 100 years. Is the people whoever you're serving or whoever your customers are they staying? And are same with your employees, right? Like that's the basic measure, right? Like years ago, we was working for an organization that was going through strategic planning, and we were spending time an inordinate amount of time wordsmithing our mission at that organization. And I had a dad of someone who was in the services that I ran, who finally, after like an hour and a half, stood up and said, he's like, I'm leaving, but I want to let you know why I'm leaving. I could care less of what word you're saying. I want to make sure my son is taken care of. And are you doing all the things that we're talking about here today? It doesn't matter to me, the word. The word could be whatever. He's
Yeah.
like, because as soon as you're not doing that, we're out. Right. Like, and so that I do firmly believe words matter. And I think that they have a lot of value in helping people understand. But his point, first and foremost, was sometimes we get so fixated on perfectly articulating that when we don't most times in life we don't perfectly articulate anything,
Yeah.
right? But at the end of the day, it's about how people feel, right? And how you show up each and every day. And we all have our awkward moments, and what is that? And so I think that's what I sort of look at, right? And that's how I measure sort of success is, right? It's, do people want to join the cause? Do they want to
Yeah.
be stay with the cause? Do they want to be connected in some way? And if the answer continues to be yes around that, when and for us to be patient when change happens, there's going to be angst. So we are going
Yeah.
to lose a couple of people around that, but over the trajectory, where are we at?
Well, it's Kaylee probably smelled this coming
I
because
did. I did. I was going to
you
bring it
know what
up.
I'm going to do it. But it's something I think I've even shared with you, Jonathan, is that it's the quote from Maya Angelou, who people said they'll never remember what you said, they don't remember what you did, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. And
Mhm.
for me, that's been a leading principle or guideline that I kind of pushed my organization, and I hear I'm not alone,
Yeah.
and not that you're affirming me per se, but I just think that the whole point of this podcast and having you here is to, hear what you're going through, right, with your
Yeah.
organization, and to know that like you said, from this, from time starting, when we're talking about people, there's some fundamental truths that are there, and I think feelings and people, and they're going to put you do need to use communication and expectations, of course, but I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I agree. It's about the experience and what you're providing, and that's
Yeah.
refreshing to hear that you also have that mindset as a leader. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So what? Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I kind of want to shift, unless you have something else
No,
there. I
go
wanted
ahead.
to kind of shift over to some of the programs and services to dig a little bit deeper. I mean, is there any initiatives or programs that you're particularly excited about?
So I think yes, but so I'll give context that sort of over the last 20 years, the ARC has really sort of evolved as an organization, particularly, and then grown in depth and breadth over the last seven. And so we do our services in two and through sort of three distinct ways. The first two are completely exclusively for people with intellectual and development disabilities. We've talked a little bit about them so far, where we're supporting people with disabilities to live, work, and connect with their communities, where the ARC is the provider. We support the staff. We hire and provide staff to provide that service. The second is for the last 18 years, we've been helping people with disabilities set their own trajectory about how they want their services. So in Maryland, you can self-direct your services if you have a disability, meaning that rather than a provider providing them, you can get the same money from the state, and a provider, a fiscal management agency like the ARC. There's two others, including us in Maryland, can support you in that. And what that means is you, as the person with a disability, we help you set you up with an EIN number. You get to hire your own staff, and the ARC provides all that back office support. So we process payroll, your accounts payable. We make sure you're compliant with Medicaid rules, and a sort of a whole host of things. So we're sort of the back office. So we support about 2,300 people today to self-direct their lives. They employ about 5,000 people in that service. In 2019, it was about 250 people
Wow.
that we supported
And
in
it's
that service. And so
5,000 now?
that sort of thing.
Like-
So that piece. And so and then about 15 years ago, we began to do affordable housing. And that was an offshoot of housing was the first service that the ARC ever provided. Housing is fundamental for anyone, but particularly for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. There's not a lot of opportunities. And back in the 70s, we were looking at about how do people not have to live in an institution or with their family. But we believe that services, so the staff providing support for people to live independently, should be separate from their house. So if they don't want the ARC to provide that service anymore, they should be able to still live in their house or apartment. And so the ARC created Chesapeake Neighbors, a housing subsidiary that manages about 70 units. But we also didn't want to just be a housing organization for people with disabilities. And so the mission of Chesapeake Neighbors is to provide quality, affordable housing for all. And so it is. So we, for people who need access to moderately or low, who might have moderate income in the jurisdictions that we provide that service, or low income, we provide housing as well for that. And then we've been broadening that around sort of community development, because housing and services are one piece, but how are we actually affecting change on communities, which our vision is really about how do we have inclusive, equitable communities? Well, you can't expect that if you're not going to be part of that. And so that sort of work. And so our growth really has been about deepening our work in sort of self-direction and improving that service to bring it to scale, and then around sort of housing, and aggressively. Chesapeake Neighbors has a goal over the next several years to double the number of units they have today.
That I think that's fantastic. I mean, honestly, and what it kind of inspires my question. And I'm going to go back a little bit. It sounds like from a leadership perspective, and leadership, you got the board and you've got a lot of great team. I mean, you've got a fantastic team. But when you think about what I keep hearing you go back to is there's almost I hate to use the keyword phrase pivoting, right? There's changes and course corrections the entire time. I mean, going back to your earlier example of where, giving somebody an earpiece, I don't know how much of that was, real science and something you really guys did, but to say, okay, I'm going to take this organization here to here and here and keep keenly aware of the need for change, right? And then but it sounds like that's been like an ongoing thing. It sounds like it's a big part of your recipe for success is to say, we're here, how do we get we're here. How do we get to the next step?
I like to say that it is always that strategic and thoughtful. I think a lot of it is that we are okay being a learning organization and realizing that sometimes we look at a problem and go, the solution has been here for 2 years and we are just figuring it out now. And so an example of that would be, in 2020, as part of the pandemic, we pivoted to not just provide behavioral support services where we help people, we write clinicians write behavior plans and support people with disabilities and their staff to navigate through them, to help improve whatever their challenges are, but to begin to provide mental health counseling. The aha moment was our consulting psychologist was willing to give some free group counseling sessions to help people with disabilities navigate COVID. And after the third session, they were talking about other issues. And then people were sort of like starting sort of 2 months later, some of the people we supported that also had behavior plans were also like being able to deal with those issues in different ways. And we finally said, well, why aren't we doing those pieces? Because for so many years, we as just said, there isn't that resource. There isn't mental health resources for people with disabilities. And we were just okay with that. That was the normal. But it really should have been 10 years ago. Like, why isn't that? And how do we create that? But no, we just sort of, but rather than sort of saying, oh, it's hard and oh, no one's in, we did an analysis. No, there wasn't any community resources in Anne Arundel County that had capacity to do that. And so we already had clinicians, and so we added that. I think the same thing, our focus on community development has been sort of the evolution of our housing work and our services work to sort of say, we, as an employer, as a service provider, we want to be embedded in the community. Well, we don't want to just be someone's neighbor and get along with people. We also want to be part of the solution. And we have to then, that means that we have to think a little bit more broadly, and it's different than social responsibility, right? And so I think for us, it's more about being okay to challenge our own selves, but also to be able to learn, right? Like, and be able to say, why are we not performing well here? Why aren't we meeting all our goals? And being able to say, oh, we should have saw that a long time ago and moved on.
Well,
and to look to implement that. And so I think our willingness to sort of see those gaps and be willing to, I don't know that course correct's the right word, but be able to put investments and resources to build around those things.
Well, the one thing I'll say, and I know Kayla's got a couple questions, but I definitely want to say this, and that, you know, you're right. It might not be a proactive decision to say, okay, to do this right now strategically because of this plan, and we're so insightful. But I think what's really important for the viewers, and as well as, you know, for ourselves, is to realize that somebody once told me, it was actually my mother who told me this, is that you can't necessarily say I'm late to the party. You know, I'm not there yet, where, you know, I'm going to measure myself and say, I haven't achieved that yet. Yeah. The truth is, at some point you're at the party, and that's what you got to focus on. And I think what I'm inspired by, and I'd reaffirm to you, is that, you know, and it takes true leadership, is to say, we may have discovered this, bumped into it, but okay, I'm going to listen to it and I'm going to execute, and we're going to, you know, go forward with it. I think that in itself, I think for most business owners or leaders, you know, we put too much of a pressure on ourselves to say, where's this magic unicorn that I created and why we're not further along? Yeah. But I think the point is, you took action when the opportunity was there.
And then we're willing to take, one of our core values is that that we want to take strategic risks, right? And that we are action oriented, right? And so that those two things have to be coupled together, right? Yeah. You can't just take strategic risks if you're not really willing to do the hard work. And you can't just be action oriented if you're not willing to put yourself a little bit outside the comfort zone. So I would agree with you. And yeah, I probably painted it in a way that there is a healthy dose of strategy in that. And we've built an organization that we have the conditions to be able to respond to that, right? And that there are leaders, or oftentimes we bring in sort of consultants and others who can help us build capacity for the short term, so as we build it for the long term.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing, Jonathan. And I can see that, you know, as a leader, you're always thinking 5 steps ahead. You're taking that risk, you know, obviously in a good way, but, you know, but how do you envision the future support and services for people with disabilities? And my second question too, I will ask as well, if there's someone with disabilities or a family member, or, you know, someone looking for your resources, the programs, the housing, you know, how do they go about? Is there a process? Do they just go to your website, certain people to reach out to?
Sure. So I think for us, our focus is on how do we deepen and broaden that work? So how do we get better at what we do? But also saying every service can sort of continue to sort of develop around that. And how do we put into practice to have people with disabilities drive their services more and more. I don't believe self-direction is an option, but it's not an option for everyone. And even if you're getting services through a provider, you should still have the same level of a choice and autonomy around that. And so that's really what for us is where we're going around that. People are interested in our services, for sure, go to our website, thearcccr.org. There is a tab under admissions. Our admissions process is you just fill out this basic, your name, email address, what service you're looking for. And then an admissions facilitator will contact you. And we're not going to ask you to fill a lot of paper. We're just going to schedule an in-person or virtual call for you. The person who's receiving services, so a lot of times when families reach out, the person who's interested, who's going to be getting services has to be part of that process. It's really important. Can't be a person-driven organization if the person's not included in that. But we want to have a conversation because a lot of times we make people fill out all this paperwork and then they're like, well, your philosophy doesn't align to me, or like you filled out all this paperwork thinking that you wanted XY service and then you actually want this. And so I look at it the same way, like the way that you go buy a new car or a house, you go tour it and talk about it. You don't fill out the paperwork until you're ready to sign on the dotted line, right?
Right.
And so it's not that we don't need certain information to complete the admissions process or to help make an informed decision of whether we can extend it and offer about you joining our services. But the first and second conversation doesn't have to be about sort of someone's deficits. It has to be about what that person wants out of services, what they envision for themselves, and to understand what our philosophies are and what those services look like. Because again, we might not be the right fit for everyone. And it's much better that you didn't put in a ton of effort into that to discover that process.
It kind of seems
first
like
and
a
foremost.
matchmaking type of process.
It's a little
good
bit of
fit,
matchmaking, but it's the same I think about it. Sometimes we overcomplicate it. It's the same way you make the decision in the same way that you would decide where you get your haircut or what doctor you go to. Like a lot of it is we talked about it earlier, right? Like how you feel, right? Like what are they saying? Does that admissions facilitator, if they say they're going to get back to you tomorrow, do they do that? Well, if they don't, well, is the program you're going to be in ever going to do that? Probably not.
Yeah.
And so it's sort of that piece. But definitely do that. And then we also on our website, if you go to the arcccr.org, there's also some, if you're just needing information referral, if you're a family or a person with disability that needs access to sort of information in Anne Arundel County or the Eastern Shore about sort of outside community services or resources, our Family Navigator can support that. And there's also a link on our website to be able to put in a request for that as well.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. And also, I guess for the listeners, the audience, how can they get involved or help support the ARC?
So first and foremost is we are always hiring, whether it's direct support professionals or other professional or corporate support positions. And so definitely encourage people to go to thearcccr.org to check out our career section. So that's one way that everyone can get involved. People also can get involved with throughout the year. We have different events. We're always while we don't always look like a nonprofit, we are a nonprofit. And so people can donate to us. We have a number of initiatives. All of our fundraising goes right back to specific services that government doesn't fund. And so around that. So just if that's how people want to get involved. And then we are also, from time to time, are looking for volunteers to participate on committees or that sort of thing. And so, again, going to our website, people can learn more about that.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would just like to say thank you very much for taking the time to share, your experiences, and honestly, very, very, inspiring cause and program that you guys are running over there. So, hats off. I mean, I salute you wholeheartedly. That's fantastic work. And it's great.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure to hear your insights, learn more about the Arc Central Chesapeake region as well, and all of the programs and what you're providing, as well as, you as the CEO and a leader in the community. So thank you.
Yeah, it was very inspiring. So, thank you very much. And for all our viewers out there, if you enjoyed what you're seeing, help us bring more content to you. We do need you to like, we do need you to subscribe, and please leave a comment. Jonathan's here, we're here. We'd love to share and pass along any questions that you may have. The Diligent Leader is about bringing great content and great leaders like Jonathan. We thank you very much for watching. So be sure to watch out for the next episode.